Hello and thanks for stopping by. This is Spider-Man for the Sony PlayStation, released by Activision and Neversoft in 2000. I played this game when it first came out and I've kept my PlayStation disc for more than 20 years now. It's just a solid game overall. I think it's important to note that this was released a few years before Spider-Man started to appear in theaters. This was developed in the late 90s, released for 2000 obviously, so we're talking a slightly more cartoony Spider-Man that tended to stick to the comics. I'll start this one by saying that the startup music is awesome. They took the cartoon music from the 60s cartoon and they remixed it into this modern 90s video game type medley. It's pretty good. This game offers a lot of unlockables. We're talking lots of different items that you can sort of access from the menu. We're going to find character sheets, storyboards, and a whole bunch of different costumes. And I think the best unlocks are, of course, the costumes. What's nice about them is the different costumes aren't just cosmetic, they give you certain abilities that are different. The PS4 Spider-Man has a ton of costumes in it, of course, but they're very different. All these different designs and styles. But here, all the costumes in the game have to be from the year 2000 and prior, so it's a totally different selection of costumes. We do get some great ones, though. There's a Ben Reilly costume, there's a Symbiote costume, and I think there's a Spider-Man 2099 costume as well. This is interesting because back when this came out, I think Spider-Man 2099 was still in the comic book stands at that point. It was in its first run. So this is a classic approach to the character of Spider-Man. You do not have unlimited web fluid. You'll need to collect web fluid icons around the game as you progress. Now, there's no logical reason as to why Spider-Man would be able to find web fluid just waiting around the city, but we're going to have to buy into this sort of arcade-style concept, I suppose, and just kind of go with it. The icons you're going to find are just sitting around. They don't drop when you defeat an enemy. They're just out in the open as you're web swinging around. This game does not handle as good as the latest modern Spider-Man games. I would say the handling is okay, but a little tank-like. And by okay, I mean, this video game you can move Spider-Man around in. And by move him around, I mean you can probably get mad at the fact that the right analog stick is going to have no use. And by no use, I mean you're going to try to use it non-stop, and it's probably going to really upset you at some point because it does nothing. So, this is a tank-like control here, with certain things not happening. That right stick isn't going to work for you. You're going to need to adjust. But once you adjust, it's not going to be too bad. I think you're probably going to notice this most the first time you find yourself in a place, maybe running around an office, trying to pick up web fluid, and all you can do is keep running around a circle of that sort of area instead of picking it up. It's going to be weird. Also, button mashing here for boss fights is not going to be useful. You're going to have to figure out how each of the bosses is like a puzzle and how you have to defeat it. Whether it's you have to go to lure somebody from a distance, or you have to pick something up and hit them with it, that sort of stuff. Button mashing will never get you to win here. You do not have control of the camera here, which is a bummer. You're just going to have to get used to the way the camera has to orient itself, which means, in a fight, if you're jumping and you're suddenly behind somebody and facing the wrong way, you're going to have to wait for the camera to move when you point in a direction. And then, after the camera's moved and you've turned, then you attack. Or you're going to be attacking in the wrong direction. You use the left analog stick to control where you move, and it goes like this. If you press to the left, Spider-Man's going to turn and move to the left. If you hold the joystick continually in that direction, you're going to keep going in that direction, forward. No matter what Spidey is doing on screen, you'll continue going left. If he runs into a wall, he'll climb the wall. And now this is kind of where you're probably going to have to adjust. If you hold the controller in that direction, you keep holding it in the direction it was, let's say left, it's going to keep on moving forward, no matter what the object is you're climbing on or how the camera is started to orient itself. So if you're in a box, for instance, and you press to the left, Spidey's going to move in that direction. If you hold the control that way, even if the camera starts to spin and move, if you keep going in that direction, you will eventually go full circle around that box. The problem is your inclination is probably going to be to try to compensate with the controller when the orientation of the camera shifts. That's going to make you start going in all crazy directions. If you find yourself getting confused at the movement of the camera and how you're not really going anywhere, you're probably trying to compensate. Just slow down and try to focus on the controls a little. You can get used to it. I think I did an okay job explaining this phenomenon. I think this makes sense to me now. But bottom line is, you're going to run into this sort of control schema issue pretty fast, and you're going to be expecting it to do one thing, and it's going to be doing something else. So it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment. There's more movement stuff that's important to note here. First, while crawling along ceilings is awesome. The way the camera moves and the ceiling suddenly becomes transparent, it's great. When you're swinging outside, it's important to know that you don't have full range from skyscraper to street. You cannot jump from a rooftop and go to the ground. You will fall and die. Also, you can't jump up the sides of buildings. You have to crawl up a building. This becomes a problem when you're in a chase level. And if you miss a rooftop and you jump and you land on the side of a building, you can't just jump up to the rooftop. You can't easily get up there and keep up with the chase. You have to climb that side until you hit the roof. This makes chase levels my least favorite level of the bunch. When we talk about web swinging, if you're on the side of a building and want to travel in another direction, you really might need to climb the building to the top before you start to swing, because it gets confusing. This sort of limits mobility, and we don't see that in the more modern Spider-Man games. It's just not quick to go back and forth on the sides of buildings. You just need to get used to it. Remember, we're not talking an open world game here, so you will have limited buildings that you can interact with. You're going to be jumping and web swinging a lot, and as sort of what you'd expect really, when you jump, you need to make sure to fully let go of the jump button before you press R2 to try to swing. 2 buttons at the same time doesn't really bode well for Spidey. Or at least it doesn't work well for me, and I find myself falling a lot. You need to be headed towards a building in order to swing. So, if you find yourself jumping and unable to swing and falling to your death, you might be jumping into a void. Face towards a building and then jump and try to swing. It sounds simple, but if you're used to the awesome Spider-Man games out for the PS4 right now, this one's different. You can also use your web shooters as offensive weapons, which is great. You can shoot people with web blasts. You can also web them up. You can also make boxing gloves and punch people with them. Or you can create a web shield and that'll explode and knock people around. It's a pretty decent variety and they all work. There are different level types because, like I said, this is not an open world game. You have to do things in a very specific order. Some levels are going to be chase levels. Some levels are going to be escape levels. And you're going to have to get good at maneuvering Spidey around quick to get around obstacles and gunfire. Luckily, you have unlimited continues and saves. The more standard levels are basically stealth levels, or they're mostly stealth depending on how you play them. You're going to crawl around, hopefully out of sight, and you're going to drop down to defeat enemies. The R1 button will be used to zip up to a ceiling, or zip completely opposite to wherever you're facing, which is probably my favorite mechanic of the game, and it's great for getting out of the way. The chase levels, when you have those, the camera's going to zoom out a little, so it's going to feel like a different level. It's going to play just a little different, which is nice. So there's some variety there. In this game, we get a ton of different Spider-Man villains. There are going to be tons of them, all the classics, and I'm not going to go through the list. Also, there are a variety of heroes that show up, even if they just show up for a second, although you can't play them. Early on, Daredevil's going to show up for a second, Black Cat shows up, the Human Torch shows up, and this is just the first 3 levels. It's nice to see other faces here, even if they're just simple skins that are applied to these blocky figures, and they have no fingers on their hands. It's just neat to see them here. There are a lot of Spider-Man references in the game, like you'd expect, but then there are also these other clever things that they sort of do with billboards in the background. There was a billboard sign early on that was clearly a knockoff of Dunkin' Donuts, but it was called Porkin' Donuts, and there was a little pig mascot on the sign. It's just clever, and instead of like X on gas, it's rocks on gas. It's neat. It's just little things that they do to sort of break up the monotony. So we have a decent Spider-Man game here, and you got plenty of punches, kicks, and different web fluid offense, and a huge selection of heroes that you get to see, and a bunch of different villains. And although the handling is a little confusing at first, it's fun to race around as Spider-Man. It just is. It's a solid game. And there was a sequel to this one too, although I haven't actually had a chance to play that one yet. It looks just as good. Well, that's all I have for Spider-Man today for the PlayStation 1. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you on another video.